Hello, this is the December 3rd science fiction meeting of the Tucson Hard Science Fiction Writers and Artists Group and readers. We had a little technical glitch where our whole meeting did not get saved, so we will miss some of the after presentation comments, I'm sorry to say, but here is the program that was the program on the 3rd. So starting with the earliest of stage presentations of science fiction. And I just want to give you this apology because I'm so sorry you won't see the other members as you usually do, but I'm sure they understand. And next time I'll do better. So here we go. I think. There we are. Science fiction on stage, some past plays of note. And we get into the rationale of why theater makes a big difference in our culture and in thinking. Science fiction also makes a big difference, but not the current car crash into spaceship crash type of media science fiction, not so much. And it's much more expensive. So you're going to get some comparative statements here that may be a bit controversial, but hey, that's what causes thinking. And I welcome your comments either way. All right, why is stage fiction, science fiction on stage an important, not to replace films, of course, we're never going to do that, not to replace when we do Zoom plays, readings, that doesn't replace live theater, and I'll be discussing that too. But there's a wonderful element of creative chaos in the performance, and it's all missing. It's all ironed out. It's canned. One thing that they don't bring up often about film as a disadvantage is it's canned. You see one film, it's the same film every time. There's no interaction between the film and the viewer in the sense of a different house can change what gets done in a play. A cold house might make them emphasize certain kinds of bits. A very engaged audience might make them do other bits. So it's not canned. Every night is a whole new entity, and plays do not exist between the performances. Films, once filmed and out there, are always out there. It's a continuous product, if you want to put it that way, whereas plays only exist in the magic moments in which they are enacted. So when we go way back to some of the earlier parts of drama on SF, there were no virtual media, there was no TV, there was not even radio, there was nothing. And people had to see these face to face and live. I'm speaking here of not the earliest, because we can go back to the Greeks, but in the 19th century, what we actually will peg as Western standardized science began to be done on the stage. So here we go. As I say, the beginnings could be the Clouds, that wonderful comedy by Aristophanes of Greece, of ancient Greece, Attic Greece, as it's sometimes called, where he tracked the separation in society between the people who were not the elite and the elite. It's very contemporary in that sense. And he felt that these philosophers, the elite, were often philosophers in Greece, and they lived up in what was called cloud cuckoo land, up in the clouds. And he did a lot of satire of them. So that some of this might be considered, because of the fantasy or science fiction element, you could call it a proto-science fiction, that these philosophers, really deserved a bit of a ribbing. And then you have Shakespeare's The Tempest, among many other things. I'm just listing a couple that people might have heard of. And in The Tempest, you have another philosopher, alchemist, chemist. He's a magical man of science who is able to transmute creatures and create beings. And so this is very much a precursor of stage science fiction. But then we get to what most people, I'm going to move my little logo of myself up here out of the way so it's not taking up my screen. Okay, I could even get rid of it, put it into a smaller thing there, hiding my thumbnail. All right, Richard Brinsley Peake's Presumption, or The Fate of Frankenstein, was the first live theater adaptation of Mary Shelley's 1818 novel, Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus. And for those who don't do the Greeks that much, Prometheus was that erring person who invented fire and gave it to mankind. And maybe he was a Titan. I'm a little vague on that myself. But once he did that, he was in deep trouble with the gods because they didn't want mankind to have this power. So Mary Shelley called it that on purpose, and because back then people did know their classic mythology. And it's a tale of transgression, going where people should not go, taking powers from the gods that should not be taken from the gods. And Brinsley Peak's presumption, you can see to your right, this is, I think, a play script cover page with a lino cut or a etching, some kind, or maybe even a lithography was also used. Whatever it is, it shows what the costuming was like. It looks like they recycled some of their Hamlet costumes in order to do Frankenstein, because that's not contemporary dress for the 1880s. So as it's another tradition, recycling your costumes. And I don't know what that garb, that must be Frankenstein's monster there in the sort of toga-esque costume. I don't know where they arrived at that from. Maybe it's supposed to be his sheets of being operated on. And normally in the Universal horror films, we had an Igor, but in the Brinsley Peak Presumption or the Fate of Frankenstein, we have Fritz, and Fritz takes that role. So there isn't too much we can say about it. I have not searched to see if the adaptation is available. I don't know if it would be stageable or even done as play reading now, because it might be so florid, let's put it that way, in its way of speaking, that it would put people off. But you never know, and I can look into it. And I'll be saying this here and there throughout the talk, because there are things that I'm only giving you what I found in the references. I have not read them, and I will admit that when I have not read the play. Okay, so this I have seen. I have seen Jacques Offenbach's The Tales of Hoffmann done as an opera, and at least I've seen it on TV, in a TV televised version. It includes this episode based on Der Sandmann. This is where a poet falls in love with a mechanical doll owned by a scientist. So you see a very recent vintage of a staging on your right. And again, I recommend this to you. Also, you recognize the Tales of Hoffmann being the source of the Nutcracker, because those were some of E.T.A. Hoffmann's tales, and were, of course, memorably made into an opera by, and ballet opera by Tchaikovsky. And we're coming into the season in December when we often do the Nutcracker. So here we have this poor poet who falls in love with a mechanical doll owned by a scientist, very close to a robot. The next and very sensational thing is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I'm saying it purposely as Jekyll because I guess he was from Edinburgh, Scotland. Robert Louis Stevenson was also Scottish, and the correct pronunciation up in them parts is Jekyll. So anyway, he wrote his Jekyll and Hyde in 1886. The novella was adapted for the stage immediately. And you see some of the costuming and staging there to your right. There's some little vignettes of Hyde attacking people and Jekyll looking very virtuous with his very respectable girlfriend. So Richard Mansfield, probably being pictured there, yeah, it does, it has his name underneath, played the role of Jekyll in London's West End in August of 1888. But during this run, isn't this interesting? The Jack the Ripper murders occurred. Of course, they didn't happen in the West End. That's more prosperous. It was in the East Side in Whitechapel. And these murders hit just when he was playing this terrible role when he turned into an inhuman murderer. So of course, because people often think that people who play horror creatures are that way in real life. This is one of the myths of theater and film. Many people thought that these people like Raymond Massey, Boris Karloff, Peter Lorre, they were all terrible people in real life, and they were often wonderful people. I know for a fact that everyone loved Boris Karloff. He was not a terrible person, but often the audiences will go, oh, if they see these people in a restaurant. So it got really bad for Richard Mansfield, and people were pushing to have him prosecuted and investigated as perhaps being Jack the Ripper. The play also influenced the budding notions people had of human psychology. It was just starting to make the popular press ideas about what are our minds composed of, what is the brain, what is consciousness, and how can we keep our bad side under control and try for moral perfection. And the main solution was through morals, institutions like the church, and repressing our bad side. So I had to wonder, and this is just my own question to myself, did Freud actually see Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? And did that have any impact on his mentality? I think he was 29 when the print came out, and 31 when it started to be done in London. Maybe it was also done in Vienna. So he may have seen this as a play. He may have read the book, and he did write a book called Sexual Repression. And I don't know if there are any references. I'd have to go back and do a word search, but his Sexual Repression was published a lot later in 1915. But you can't rule out that he may have been influenced by Jekyll and Hyde. So here I'm going to have one of my clips, and I'm going to show some of them, but maybe not all of them. One of them from another play is about 10 minutes long. I might show part of it if I can get it to run. Part of the trick here in good old Zoom is getting your clips to run. And I'm going to try that right now, because Frederick March is the only actor to have gotten a Best Actor award for a role in a horror film. And much of the horror techniques on stage were brought into this role, because 1931, he was a Broadway trained stage actor, and it does show sometimes. The way that they do his makeup and the effects is through gel colors on the Klieg lights. So it isn't so much, they use a couple prostheses of teeth, but that's about it for makeup. And it's usually just the coloring on his face that changes. So if you watch this carefully, you can see where the colorful gel color effects come in. And of course, they don't show as colors because it's black and white. They just show as darkening and parts of his face. And you see in this presentation, in this way that Frederick March enacted this, it's very different. He's not, oh, I'm so evil. He's so happy. This is what made this a different kind of a presentation of Hyde. He's happy, he's free, and he's all happy in the beginning of this transformation. So that differentiated his performance, I think, from almost any other that we've had before or since. Next, I'm going to show you something about Karl Čapek's RUR, Rossum's Universal Robots. premiered 2nd of January, 1921. And most people do not know this. This is the origin of the word robot in English and all the languages around the world. This place sets out not only to show a new android, because it's really an android, it's not a metal robot, but it takes a very current and even futuristic view of what will be the impact on employment. What will happen when man is rendered obsolete? Because many jobs, excuse me, many jobs can easily be done by robots. And this will travel up the tree, not only with the grunt jobs, the entry-level jobs, but professional jobs. We may be getting to the place where we could have robot senators, we could have robot clergymen. We certainly are having telemedicine where perhaps some of the more routine operations, say appendectomies, could be done by robots instead of live surgeons. So this will impact our society. We aren't there yet. People think it's impacted it or affected it as much as is going to happen, but we have not even half gotten to how much the artificial intelligence and robotics is going to change our life. And we have seen the disinvestment in industrial towns, how especially in the steel industry, they became quite robotized in order to compete, with Japan and other countries. And it threw tens of thousands out of work, just as in RUR. So these things they're coming out just as was proved. It's amazing. And it's a very short play. It might be worth reading. And it has a very philosophical side to it, in that Chopik was read up on philosophy, and he not only went into technology and futurism, but he had thoughts about, well, what is life? What is man actually doing here? What is the goal here? So I might not show this entire clip, but I'll start the clip. It's about how the old philosopher who invented these android beings called robots thought of them. And first he wanted them to be more human. And then his son took over. His son was an engineer, none of that nonsense. And it's very cute because then you get into the capitalist side. The son doesn't want to have anything that isn't necessary. None of this about robots playing violins or anything. So here goes. And we'll see if I can start it and get it to work here. And should this not work, you have the link. I can send anyone the link if you just put your comments in the comment under the YouTube, the YouTube file in our YouTube group channel. And it seems to be a little bit bulky. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's basically what I said, going over a philosopher's view of robots versus his very capitalist son, who's an engineer. And I'm going to, oh, here it comes.
We cannot take responsibility for items damaged in transit. Captain, your vessel was given warning at the time of loading that was not suitable for the carriage of progress. So damage to its cargo cannot be charged to our account. Yours faithfully, Boston's Universal Robots. Got it now?
Yeah.
New letter. Finished work. And date. We are pleased to confirm receipt of your order for 15,000 robots.
Sorry, I'm showing captions. I just realized I wasn't showing them until now. Apologies.
Hello, Central Office. Yes. Yes, of course. Send him a telegram. Fine. Where were we?
The lady outside,
Who is it?
I do not know.
Mr. Glory, managing director of. Send him in. You know,
Please,
with the visiting card of Mr. Glory.
Mr. Glory is my father. And the Glory.
Oh, Mr. Glory, this is an exceptional honor for us that
But you can't show me the door.
we can welcome the daughter of such an illustrious businessman as your father. Please, have a seat. So, here we go now. Now, Mr. Glory. See our factory for making people see your stuff. All our visitors want to see the factory, and of course, you're very welcome.
I thought it wasn't allowed to.
Enter the factory? Well, of course it's not, but everyone that comes here does have a recommendation from somebody.
But why did you never let me finish?
Sentence? Is that not what you were going to say?
I was going to ask.
Where I might show you something of the factory that the others might have been able to see. Well, I'm sure that's possible.
What makes you have to go past that?
Everybody else. Making artificial people is an industrial secret, but I can personally show you more than any of the others are allowed to see.
Thank you.
All I ask is that you say nothing to anyone.
My word of honor.
Thank you. Would you not like to take off your veil?
Oh, of course. You'll be wanting to see my face. Do excuse me.
All right.
And if you would just let go of my hand.
Sorry.
Are you wanting to make sure I'm not a spy? You seem very careful.
Hmm? Yes, that's just how we are.
Don't you trust me?
Exceptionally. Oh, do excuse me, Miss Glory. This really is an exceptional honor. Did you have a good crossing?
Yes. What?
Well, because you're very young.
Are we going into the factory now?
Yes. I suppose around 22.
22 what?
Years.
21? Why do you want to know that?
Well, because you will be staying with us for some time, won't you?
Well, that depends on how much you choose to show me.
No. Damn factory. Well, of course, Miss Glory, you can see everything. Would you be interested in hearing the story that I mentioned?
Yes, I would.
Then I shall tell you. It was in 1920, when old Rossum, still a young man and a great scientist, came to live on this isolated island to study marine biology. Alongside this, he made several attempts to synthesize the chemical structure of living tissue, known as proteins. After many years of research, he eventually discovered a substance that would precisely mimic its behavior. That was in 1932, exactly 440 years after the discovery of a metal.
Do you know all this by heart?
I do. Shall I carry on?
If you like.
And this, Miss Glory, is what he wrote in his chemical notes. Nature has discovered only one way of organizing living matter. But I have discovered another, which is simpler, easier to mold, and quicker to produce than nature ever stumbled across. Just think. He wrote these words about a blob of colloidal jelly and not even a dog. Just imagine it, sitting there with his test tube, thinking how it could grow into an entire tree of life, starting with a tiny cell and ending with man himself. His glory. This is one of the great moments of history.
Well, what happened next?
Next, he had to get this life out of the test tube and speed up its development so it could grow hormones, enzymes, bones, nerves, all sorts of things. You understand?
I'm not sure. Perhaps not all of it.
I don't understand any of it. It's just using this slide, he could have made whatever he wanted. He could have made a Medusa with a brain of Socrates or a worm 50 feet long. But old Rossum had a trace of humor in him. He got it into his head to make a normal burger. First, he tried to make an artificial dog. For years and years. The result was something like a malformed deer died. for a few days. I can show you in the museum. And then he set to work making a human being.
And that's what I'm not allowed to tell anyone.
No one whatsoever.
Pity it's in all the papers then.
Yes, it is. But you know what's not in all the papers, Miss Gloria? Old Rossum was completely mad. Seriously, quite mad. He actually wanted to make a human being.
Well, that's what you do, isn't it?
That's something like that, yes, but he meant it entirely literally. He wanted to take the place of God. Do you know anything about anatomy, Miss Gloria? Yeah, not a lot. Old Rossum got into his head to make everything. Every gland, every organ, just as they are in the human body. The appendix, the tonsils, the belly button, the spleen, even things without function, like sexual organs.
But the sexual organs, they
They do have a function, I realise that. If we're going to be making people artificially, then there's not really much need for them.
I see what you mean.
In the museum, I'll show you the monstrosity we created. It's supposed to be a man, but he lived for only 3 days. It's horrible. Just horrible. But on the inside, he's everything a man is supposed to have. Really, the detail is quite amazing. And then, old Rossum's nephew came to the idea. This man, he was a genius. As soon as he saw what the old man was doing, he said, well, this is ridiculous. To spend 10 years making a man, if you can't do it quick in nature, then you might as well just give up on it. And then he began to study anatomy himself.
That's not what they say in the papers either.
They say the papers is nonsense. They say that the old man invented the robots himself. It might have been all right for the university, but he had no idea about industrial production. It was youngsters who came up with the idea of making humans.
I remember when I first you. It was quite absurd. Nobody knew what it meant.
Yes. It was young Russell McCoy. Robots, artificially created people, and living, intelligent workers. What they say in the papers about 2 great men working together is just a fairy story. They never stopped arguing. In fact, the old atheist, he had no idea about industry and commerce, and he thought he'd be making real people, real politicians, real professors, real idiots. Eventually, locked old Rossum into his laboratory while he carried on with the real until he found old Rossum.
What did they make you do?
Now, young Rossum. This was the start of a new age. He took one good look at the human body and realized straight away it's far too complicated. Any engineer worth his salt would design it far more simply. So he began to redesign the whole thing. In short, sorry, Miss Gloria, I'm not boring you, am I?
No, quite the opposite. It's fascinating.
Young Rossum said to himself, man's a being that does things like go for a walk, play the violin, feel happy. All sorts of things. It's simply not needed.
Oh, I see.
No, wait. Simply not needed for activities like yarning or calculating. Petrol engine doesn't have any castles on it, Miss Gloria. Making an artificial worker is like making a petrol engine. The simpler you make production, the better you make the product. What sort of worker do you think is the best?
Well, the best sort of worker. I suppose one who is honest and dedicated.
Best sort of worker is the cheapest worker. One with the least amount of needs. What young Rossum invented was a worker with the least needs possible. He threw away everything that wasn't of vital use to his work. In other words, he threw out the man and put in the robot. This glory. Robots are not people. They're stronger than them, cleverer than them. They have no soul.
They do say that man was created by God.
So much the worse for them. God has no idea about modern technology.
I saw my first robot in our village. They bought him. I mean, they employed him.
Bought, story. Robots are bought and sold.
They obtained him to work as a road sweeper. I watched him working. He was strange, quiet.
Did you see my types?
I didn't really notice that.
You know, IOR has never really made individual robots, but we do have some that are better than others. And the best ones can live up to 20 years.
And then they die, do they?
Yes, they get worn out. So, come in. Now, get started.
Pleased to meet you. It must be very happy out here, but
All right, that gave you an idea of what was going on in the invention of the androids, how the first person was very philosophical, but the next one was not. He was an engineer. And he was a capitalist. So he only wants the bottom line. Okay, so the next play that I'm going to go on to is George Bernard Shaw's Back to Methuselah, which was produced on stage, I presume in London, in 1921 as well, the same year. This play challenged a lot of ideas about the length of life and humanity's role in time. And I don't have much detail on the staging of this particular adaptation. I believe it was first a novel and then became a play. It may have started its life as a play. I'm not sure. He did write more plays than other things, so possibly Back to Methuselah was a stage play. Someone in 2014 created a little dialogue between George Bernard Shaw and who he would call the life force. He was an anti-deist. He didn't believe in a humanoid God. So he has this life force chiding George Bernard Shaw. And this is much shorter. This is pretty funny. I think you'll enjoy it.
He was sitting there minding his own business and trying his best to right a potboiler replete with adulterous affairs and a couple of good sword fights, when it had him round the throat again, demanding, "How dare you disobey me thus? I, who made the fish to thirst for the air and create nostrils for itself and feet, so we can walk upon the earth. I, who made the giraffe to stretch its neck to attain to the green beauty of the leaves, and the mouse to insist on wings and arrange them out of its own flaccid flesh so it might fly in the dark like a bird, and apes like you to seek more mind out of muddled mute sludge over eons of hit and miss attempts. A mind to be my pilot and my guide, and you use it to feed your own greedy face. There you go, spewing Lamarckian nonsense again," said he. "And if that isn't bad enough, you make me talk it too. Mystical gobbledygook that flummoxes science and slurs divinity and goads all sentient clusters of cells subscribing to fact or faith to shout blasphemy from the bowels of billion-year-old lungs. And who can blame them? To make matters worse, you make me believe it myself. You make me a cursed genetic freak and a puncture on the face of life and a damned mutation with no like organism to breed more of my kind with. You make me to speak with such infernal roundabout wit that my fellow creatures are too delighted by how I say things to pay the first shred of attention to what I have to say. Just as you did with Jesus Christ, damn you. And now I demand to know if I'm to be crucified like he was." "Certainly not," he replied. "You'll live to be 94. Too old to be martyred and too young to learn," he moaned. "Remember the giraffe?" said the life force out of the chaos.
All right, with that, we will turn to Venus, the 1927 feminist science fiction play, which was done on 55th Street west of Broadway in the year 1927, a mere 6 years later than both RUR and Back to Methuselah. We finally have a woman playwright, and she is a woman who had been a very progressive, this was a progressive era, progressive woman, and she dealt with those things listed on the screen: double standards, trial marriage, free love, prostitution, divorce, and Freudian psychology. However, here she delves using the trappings, and maybe more than the trappings of science fiction, to come up with a drug that feminizes male behavior and masculinizes female presentation. So it's sort of creating an in-between space between the genders. And this play did not run a long time, because we are talking about 1927, and those who knew her just challenging the general standards of society, and they had gone that far, could not quite get their minds around challenging the gender, hard-shelled two genders, gender roles and biology. So they were not quite ready for this play, but who knows? I don't know if there's a script out there, and it does say it's in 3 acts. If we do a reading of it, we might have to considerably boil it down to a 1 act, but it might be interesting. I don't know if we will find it, but we will try. Here we go. Oops. I skipped one. I have to go back here. Previous. Skip somebody. Oh dear. In the pre-World War II plays, what happened? We will go back in and find out what's going on here. Oh, in the pre-World War II plays, this is ahead, that we have really moved ahead. I'm sorry. I must stop share for a minute and reshare. I will back this sucker up and we will reshare it. There, next one. Sometimes these little burps happen just from what's going on the electrical circuitry in the computer, who knows. So back to our Zoom and back to our sharing. I apologize very much. We will now share again. Okay, so I'm getting kind of a half screen view here. I don't know why. And I do have two screens open on Zoom, and I'm going to get rid of one of them. And it looks like one of them has gone. Okay. Back to Zoom, back to meeting. Okay, back to me, back to the Zoom room. And it appears that I need to stop the share and restart it. So I'm sorry, I don't know why we're having this problem. I had 2 copies of the thing open, I guess. Okay, so now you can see that after the pre-World War II had many interests about atomization of peoples, automating, get this right, work due to, I believe I'm on the wrong kind of a view. We should be in slideshow mode. There we go. So they were worried about employment because it was the Depression. But as World War II came in, and especially near the end, we had a terrible thing. The atomic bomb happened, and we created it here in the United States, and it was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Days after that, theater came in with its own comment, and we saw the first atomic weapons play, Wings Over Europe, which was done in the Martin Beck Theater, directed by Ruben Mamoulian, but previously, that was the live theater. It was done on Theater of the Air on radio only a few days after the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. It was a Theater Guild production, and I would play it for you, but the sound is rather poor, so I'm not going to get involved in that. It's worth hearing. You just need to put Wings Over Europe Theater Guild on the Air into YouTube and it will come up. And I think it's better if individuals listen to it because I think filtering it through YouTube even makes it worse. So this is what the Theater Guild wanted people to know. And there was an introduction mentioning the bomb and everything at the time that this was put on Theater of the Air. So moving ahead here. Okay, one more time should get us, there we go. So we saw that, and we know that the prestigious Theater Guild produced this little known play in September 1945. But a lot about this play has been lost. I don't know how, please tell me why we lose these things. The next one is by Arthur Kessler, whose Cold War type novel was called Darkness at Noon, about autocracy, dictatorships, propaganda, and Cold War issues. But right after the bomb, he also had another play, and that one was called, if I can get the Twilight Bar. And he was concerned about the bomb as well. And his play, The Twilight Bar, features two extraterrestrials who threaten to destroy Earth, sort of like Gort and Klaatu in The Day the Earth Stood Still, unless the inhabitants of a small island achieve happiness within 3 days. I'm not claiming that this was any influence on The Day the Earth Stood Still. I doubt that it was. So this was performed in Paris in 1946, at Cornell in 1960. We might be able to find a script at Cornell in their archives, but who knows? These things are very, very random, and it's like chaos in the universe, whether we'll find any script for this. I assume this was also a full-length play. Then Elias Canetti, the Italian Nobel Prize winner. I'm almost sure, I'd have to go back and look, that he had been in a concentration camp during World War II. And his science fiction play, I don't believe it was ever a novel, was called Their Days Are Numbered in Italian, and often translated as The Numbered in English. It's about society in the near future where people are numbered according to the known date of their death. And when we can map everybody's brains and their whole genome, we will know what diseases are coming up, and it might be possible almost to get it down that fine that we will know at least the year of death or close. And so then they could be tattooed or in some way have a chip inserted. This is it, you're getting close. So anyway, his 1984 text, Crowds and Power, I guess it was put out in German, Masse und Macht, explores why packs of people like wolves obey their rulers. And as if by an ET explaining to one another, the power of people asking questions is very important when people start forming into packs. And he makes this very clear in all of his works, and that's probably why he did win the Nobel Prize. And again, he's another person worth looking into, Elias Canetti, a very famous Italian writer. Okay, don't want to go too far, but it's not responding to me. And sometimes this means I'll go 5 slides instead of the next one. I don't know what's up here. What's up? Why aren't you responding? It's very funny. Okay, so I will try the next button and see. There we go. This is Gore Vidal, and those of you that are a bit older can remember Gore Vidal. He was very big on the TV talk show circuit, in that inner circle of intellectuals and playwrights and writers. He wrote a number of best-selling novels, but he wrote this one play that came out in 1956 called Visit to a Small Planet. You can see the playbill showing Cyril Richard, and he won a nomination for a Tony for this performance. It ran forever. It ran 388 performances. And you may wonder why a science fiction play hit Broadway and ran that long, but it was because of the times. It was McCarthyism, the Cold War, military paranoia, and the rise of TV. So this lead role of Cretan, or however he's pronounced, wants to view the Civil War, and he has a time and space machine where he had it set for the Civil War, and I think instead he ends up contemporary in 1956. So he's coming in as someone, again, from the outside, and because of that outsider perspective that was so important, every time you want to make a statement about contemporary society, rather than turn it into a harangue, it's better if you have some being who comes from somewhere else, either the past or the future, or he's an animal who suddenly can talk or something, and then they can comment on conditions. In this case, it's an extraterrestrial. And because no one else felt free to talk then, you weren't allowed to criticize anything, and everyone was looking over their shoulders and being suspicious of everyone, that this film was like a great release. Everyone went to see it. They loved it. And the humor might seem a little bland now, but back then, no one felt free to talk. So it was hugely popular. Oh, and they made a Jerry Lewis film of it, which was much denatured and changed. It didn't have all that in it. It just simply kept the idea of the man from another planet and some of the funny bits about making fun of products around the home and things. So the next one is from 1962. I'm trying to keep in sort of a chronological order. I think I have one out of order that I have to move later, but this is a satirical play by Spike Milligan, who was a very, if not avant-garde, very satirical playwright in the early 60s, late 50s in Great Britain. And so this is set a few months after World War III, or the nuclear misunderstanding. That's very British, understated. It lasted a couple minutes, including the signing of the peace treaty. So the nuclear fallout is producing very strange mutations. And this one character, Lord Fortnum, finds himself transforming into a bed sitting room. And another character turns into a parrot and a wardrobe. And this was done in the Marlowe Theatre in Canterbury, England. So the Brits really love this kind of humor. It's very similar in a way to Monty Python. And it is on YouTube, and I believe you can find it there, or if not YouTube, one of the other streaming sources has it. And for me, it was free. I believe it was a free view. So look around. It may not be for any charge. It's well worth viewing. Gives you an idea of what kind of humor they were doing on nuclear issues in Great Britain prior to Dr. Strangelove, which was, directed by Stanley Kubrick, who's also British. Ray Bradbury translated, or I should say adapted, his own Martian Chronicles in 1977 into a play format. And this is one of the few science fiction plays that have been successful. I get, Visit to a Small Planet was, but this is another one that was. And this was at the other side of the country, the West End, on the West Coast, at the Colony Theater. Evidently, the play was very popular. It may have something to do with Ray Bradbury's local celebrity status in LA. And by the 70s, people all knew the Martian Chronicles. It was a very popular book. And so, although it has dropped back in widespread acclaim now, it was very much of the moment in 1970s. The staging was kept simple, according to what I've read. I don't have a YouTube version that was recorded and then transferred to a digitized form. And you just see one of the scenes where people are talking to each other, and you can see that it's not obsessive. It has some showy, stagey costuming and metallic makeup, but that's not at all uncommon in the theater. Here's another unknown play, The Basement Window by Antonio Buero Vallejo. It traces the socio-effects of the Spanish Civil War. And I want to say he's from Spain, but this graphic is from Latin America. So I'm thinking he was Spanish and they were just presenting it somewhere in South America. I think this may come from Argentina, the graphic that I'm using. And again, he's well worth looking into because we have scholars from the future. And again, what did I say? Jonathan Swift and his Gulliver's Travels. You take someone who isn't part of humanity and let that person observe the foibles of your current time. It makes it far more palatable for people who don't want any comment. And they're so sensitized to people making any kind of comment on conditions. And right away, they want to peg the person who's commenting as a right winger or a left winger. But if you can make it an alien being, it isn't a right winger, a left winger, or a progressive, or a conservative, or a paleo conservative, or whatever. It's an alien being. And these are very useful in dislodging these blockages in culture where we can't talk to each other. And they also make it lighthearted. They take it out of the angry, heading toward violence realm into the, oh, isn't that funny? Haha. So that's an important role that science fiction allows people to think, but it doesn't get into the really ugly confrontations. This one, again, it seems like a lot of these have the same. I'm beginning to see a pattern here. These are lady explorers coming from the past, and they go into the future. And so they're commenting on what the future was in 1983 and mohair, jello molds, Noxema, Cool Whip, and things that seem incredible and insane to them. They can't even understand what people are doing these things, the reasoning behind it. So they're every bit as surprised as the aliens are with what culture has become in 1983. So this is a valuable, valuable tool, and you see people are using it differently. Sometimes these beings are from Earth, sometimes they're extraterrestrials, and it doesn't take huge special effects, and it's very potent in what it can say about our current situation. So here we have one that does something slightly different, and it was a 1988 play by a playwright named Constance Congdon. And this has a dual function, and it makes it a little bit more nuanced or multi-layered. You never know. I think it's kept sort of in the open-ended zone where you don't know if the man who thinks he's come in contact with the aliens and has all these incredible narrations and proof and trying to convince everyone that he's a travel guide and conducted by aliens from outer space. But he's also got Alzheimer's. So, you know, you don't know which way it is. Is he really an Alzheimer's patient and it's all in his imagination? Or is he really someone who's become a travel guide, maybe been colonized by these aliens? And evidently there's a lot of funny, painful, but comic moments in this play. And I believe at the time it was used, you know, with groups who have a relative who has Alzheimer's. Then we get to Tom Stoppard, and he is one of the most ambitious. He doesn't always bring it off, but he's very ambitious in trying to use hard concepts, hard science. It's hard to use hard science. And in this play called The Hard Problem, he's having a woman neuroscientist named Hillary something, and it's right around the time of the elections in the US, so I don't think that was an accidental choice of name. And she's a neuroscientist trying to get to the nature of why we have consciousness, not only brain reflexes and behaviors, but real self-reflective consciousness. Up against Hillary, we have, well, I think Spike, her mentor in her program, is also an evolutionary biologist, and we'll call them evil bios. They totally don't buy into the empathy, unselfishness, altruism, compassion, social conscience. They don't believe in it. They think everything ultimately is for our own selfish reasons and our own survival. So here's poor Hillary trying to go at it with them and doing her research, but she has one lab assistant who has fallen deeply in love with her. And this lab assistant rigs some of her evidence in order to prove that there is such a thing as empathy. But then, people discover that it was a little bit jiggered, and that creates some doubt about her work. And I don't want to do anything too sequential, but in the plot, she has a boss who's very bottom line, capitalist oriented, a hedge fund owner. He owns her research firm, and he has an adopted daughter. It turns out that Hillary had a child out of wedlock whom she had to give up, and whom Jerry Kroll, her hedge fund research firm owner, has adopted. And the child's name is Catherine. And at some point, in very Dickens fashion, it becomes known that Hillary's daughter, Catherine, is the child of her hedge fund scientific lab owner. And I don't remember even how that turns out, but it's interesting because it argues whether there is such a thing as goodness, not only why there's consciousness, but is there goodness? Are there any real values that aren't just survival values that we don't delude ourselves about? So it's kind of two point, yes or no, up, down. But I read a sociologist critic's review, and he said that Stoppard is limiting this to binary issues, that either there is a supernatural and a natural, and both the supernatural and the natural are individualistic. And he said from a sociological point of view, and highly so, by the way, the evolutionary biology-based macho hedge fund owner wants sexy topics, sexy issues to get the big grants. And so the sociologist says there's a third point of view, that these groups, whether you're talking about the evolutionary biologists, the religious groups, the anti-religious groups, Hillary's own cohort of grad students, and society in general with its political parties and layers of classes, are all just group discourse communities and behaviors. So moral pressures basically are just the words that groups say to each other and how they enforce their structures with penalties. It isn't that these things exist so much outside of our ken, is that they are enforced group behaviors. And so this reviewer felt that was too individualistic, each person deciding or knowing whether this is for everyone. I figured it out. It's individualistic, and there is a God, or there are morals or not. But you have to factor in, according to the sociologist, the power that social structures have, and they glue us together. So he felt that middle zone of social consciousness and social structures should be factored in, and that group pressure, group power, and group policing need to be considered as a determinant of what we do, and that how you evaluate whether or not there is morality comes directly from that. Now, this isn't his most famous play, Stoppard. His most famous play is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead from the 60s, which was a retelling of Hamlet from two very minor characters' points of view, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. And it completely changes the meaning of the play and shows some of the chaos of the universe, because it's not the way that we envision the whole structure of everything. And they're acting weird and being very Monty Python and talking about philosophical things before they die in the play. So it's well worth seeing. And his other two well-known science fiction plays are Arcadia and Hapgood. Arcadia is interesting because it deals with Fermat's last theorem about whether time can be altered, or what we know, and how what we know or may not know may alter the future of everything that then is going to occur. And that's a great oversimplification of Arcadia, but it plays and it loops around, with various plot turns, these ways that time and space can be altered or not, according to Fermat. And Hapgood is just another place where Stoppard tries to fit, he tries to retrofit two distinct genres together, quantum physics and a spy tale. So it isn't just spies going after a MacGuffin, but he really uses some of the knowledge of quantum physics and tries to, again, demonstrate the complexity of human beings. Stoppard's own life was very strange in that he was Czech, Jewish Czech, and he had to go to Singapore when the Nazis marched into Czechoslovakia. And so as a very young child, he grew up in Singapore. And then his father got killed in some way. His mother moved to India. And there, I think it was in India, she met a British officer. So he ended up being raised in England with his stepfather, Stoppard, being his father figure. And he went to standard British schools. But he had that very strange meshing together of different worlds in his early childhood. And that may give him a very outsider view, just like other playwrights have to invent someone. He himself is feeling the outsider. And the most recent play that Stoppard has out is called Leopoldstadt, and it's about Jewish people in denial of their Jewish identity, and it's set in a neighborhood in Vienna. So he's starting to deal with it out and out overtly. Now, Jordan Harrison's Futura is another play where we're dealing in the near future, and humanity has confused everything because, you know, Wikipedia and all of our fragmented attention and the way that we parse and jumble up information is making people very confused. So some ruling company is trying to get control of all knowledge and just get rid of stuff that the company doesn't feel are useful bits of knowledge. And that is much easier done with digital knowledge than perhaps it was with little secret libraries, as in Fahrenheit 451, where you had books scattered around that people couldn't get hold of and they were being hidden. So they kept knowledge going that wasn't in tune with the current what do you call it, party line. So, but this is where the party line becomes the company line, and they want to get rid of a lot of the knowledge of the world. Well, anytime this thing is ready to go ahead, it looks like, I don't know what is stopping me here. Oh, here we go. Okay, Jordan Harrison's Marjorie Prime imagines a future where we have holograms now standing in for robots. A lot of Ray Bradbury's work, we had robots taking on very realistic nursing, companion, loved one roles. But here we have a future where it is holograms who are taking the caretakers of our loved ones. And it's also where perhaps the holograms can represent the departed people so that they're not really gone. And it's a method of grief therapy for those who are missing their dead loved one. And I don't know how you would do that on stage. That obviously what they show on the right wouldn't be possible on the stage unless you had a real hologram there on stage. So I want to thank you for taking part in this and watching this Zoom presentation. We are starting a group and it's coming up. We're going to have a little get together on the 11th of December. We have our membership is from 3 continents. We have one member in Calcutta, one in Zambia, one in Portugal, and I think there's a couple more in Great Britain, and the rest are from the United States. So soon we hope to have some of these readings. They're not going to be stage plays, but they're going to be things like I was telling you about in this presentation that are very cognitive, very engaging, and cause people to think, that do not involve multi-million dollar CGI special effects of crashing spaceships, blowing up of planets, and things of that nature, which, you know, a little independence cannot do that, even in films, but you certainly can't do that on stage. But what we're doing is kind of in between. We're just doing readings, sort of like radio drama with a few projections or maybe sound effects. And so I hope you wish us to break many legs And we are hoping to bring this before you on this science fiction YouTube channel, the Tucson Hard Science SF channel. And if you do those keywords, it'll probably come up. Right now, we don't have anything except Rock the Nuclear Clock, our little satire about nuclear weapons. But keep, stay tuned, as they say, and other things may appear. And you can contact me for more information up at the top, glowmick@dakotacom.net, glomc@dakotacom.net. I'll give you a second to write that down. And once again, thanks for being here today, and we hope you like the show. Thanks again.